Hi everyone, I'm Shaylin here with Reedsy. Today I'm going to be talking about discovery writing. So discovery writing is the method of writing where you don't use an outline to write your book. And it's a method of writing that a lot of writers implement. It's very common, but at the same time, there are a lot of misconceptions and actually sometimes even stigmas about this way of writing. Outlining is also a great way to write, and if you prefer to write from an outline, we've got a video on how to make an outline on this channel that I will leave a link to. But for lots of people, discovery writing is just the more natural way for them to write and yields better results. Personally, I myself am a discovery writer. I've tried both methods, but in the end, I've come back to writing without an outline, and I've found a lot of benefits from writing without an outline. So today I wanted to share some tips for how to discovery write a book. The first thing that I wanted to say before we get into these tips is that there's no reason to feel bad about being a discovery writer. A lot of writers feel kind of bad about it. They feel like to discovery write a book, they're kind of giving in to the less effective form of writing, sacrificing efficiency or even quality for what they enjoy more. It's not true at all that a discovery written book will require more revisions or be of lower quality than one that was written with an outline. If discovery writing is better for you and works better for you, then it's very likely that it will lead to a stronger result. So to start, here are some benefits that you might find from discovery writing. These are not set in stone, this is all very individual. The first one is that you have more information when you reach each plot point. When you're making an outline, you're making that outline and deciding what all the plot points will be before you've actually written the book. Whereas when you're discovery writing, each time you get to a plot point, you either decide what goes next or how it's going to play out, having already written up until that point. So you actually have a lot more information at your disposal. I also find it's easier to implement changes. Sometimes it can be a little scary when you have an outline to make a drastic change while you're writing because you feel like you don't want to disrupt what you've planned to come later. But when you don't have any plan for what comes later, or that plan is a bit vague or flexible, it's a lot easier to make a dramatic change or a big revision while you're writing. It's nice to be able to be open to that and have the story be flexible and able to accommodate that. I find I get much richer characters from discovery writing because I find that the most character development for me comes from just writing the character. I also find I'm less likely to run into issues of my characters acting out of character just because I'm making choices based on what I know about the character rather than what I planned to do in the outline, which might not be in line with how the character has now developed. Personally, I also find my prose and my scene work is a lot richer when I'm discovery writing. When I don't know what comes next, I find I take my time a lot more and get deeper into the scene and think more deeply about every single scene. When I have it all planned out, it's really easy for me to go, well, I guess I'll write 5 scenes today. Boom, 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 done, because they're all planned out. Whereas when I'm discovery writing, you have to really work through the scene really deeply in order to figure out what's going to come next. So for me, it leads to much better just prose writing. If you're more of a discovery writer, it might be because you're more creative when you have questions for yourself that you have to actively figure out the answer to. I like to have questions for myself. I want to go into writing a book with a lot of things that I don't know. For me, that when I outline, the creative part of my brain kind of puts on its sunglasses, lies back in its lawn chair and is like, don't talk to me, I'm on the beach. Because it feels like the creative part is done because I've already figured out the story and what's going to happen. But it's not done, so that's why I like to have a lot of questions for myself. So all of that said, here are some tips that have really helped me when discovery writing. So the first tip is to outline as you go. This obviously seems very counterintuitive because discovery writing is writing without an outline. But I have found that it's really helpful to make an outline as I write. Every time I finish a chapter, I go back and I add it to my outline. The reason I do this is just because it's really helpful to have that outline for revision purposes, so that when you go to revise your book, you have this overview of where every scene is and the chapter breakdown. My second tip is to get feedback on your first act while you're drafting. If your first act is set up well, the second and the third act will have all the pieces they need to kind of fall into place. Sure, they might need revisions, but it probably won't be things that are fundamental to the story. However, if you have problems in your first act, that's going to bleed through the entire story. That's why I think it's really useful to get feedback on the first act while you're drafting so that you know you've got all the pieces in place. So for the confidence of knowing everything is set up properly, it helps to get some edits on your first act. The next tip is to not ignore a problem. If something isn't developing or isn't working or just doesn't make sense, stop and fix it immediately. This is probably one of the biggest mistakes that I made when I first started discovery writing. I had a couple characters who just weren't really developing. They weren't clicking, I didn't really understand who they were, and I got like 70 pages into this book without stopping to just do that character development work. And so as a result, I had like 70 pages where these characters were just underdeveloped and they didn't have personalities. I had noticed that these characters weren't really developed way back on like page 20. It would have been better to just stop and do the character development then and fix something that wasn't working naturally. It's great as a discovery writer to be able to rely on just your natural brainstorming process, but every once in a while it's going to hit a wall and you have to kind of just stop to work through something. The next tip is to focus on what your story needs. Probably the biggest issue that a discovery writer can run into is extraneous content. A lot of extra scenes that don't add anything, that are there because you don't know where you're going. This happens when a writer doesn't know what happens next, so they kind of just throw in something random, and then they end up doing this so many times that the book is full of random content that doesn't really add to anything. However, there is a pretty easy way to avoid this pitfall. If you don't know what happens next, consider one of these three options. First, ask yourself what the story needs based on what has just happened. So what are the natural consequences of what has just happened? Number two, make your character do something active because this will inherently further the plot. Or number three, go back and delete the last 1 or 2 scenes. Probably the reason why you've hit a wall where you don't know what happens is because you kind of veered off path just a little while ago, and now you've hit a wall because this isn't the way your story goes. Your story goes this way. So you need to go back and find the fork in the road where you took the wrong turn. It's probably a couple scenes back. The next tip is to try to learn something or to teach the reader something about the character in every single scene. And this doesn't just have to apply to your protagonist. This can be something fairly small, it can be something implied. We can learn this from a choice the character makes at a certain plot point. Or you could try to integrate just a sentence of backstory or a sentence of character detail. Try to teach us something about the character in every single scene. Use your writing process as a way to actually develop your characters further. Plus, this will inherently create a lot of really interesting character development in the story going forward. And as a final tip, be flexible. The flexibility is one of the best benefits of discovery writing, so make the most of it and kind of go with the flow. Don't be afraid to change things while you draft if a better idea comes along. The lack of plan can help you be open to new ideas, and that's a really great thing, so make the most of it. I had a couple instances of this in the novel that I finished drafting a little while ago that I discovery wrote. I changed the time period the book was set in, like 3 chapters in. I had this like kind of inkling that it should be set in the past, but I was kind of scared to write something historical because I was kind of scared of all the research that would entail. But every single person, I think it was like 5 people that I talked to about this book, were all like, so this is set in the past, right? Because that was really what the story was calling for, and I knew that it made more sense. And I'm glad I went with that because it turned into kind of an inherent and important part of the story. I can't really see how the story would have worked in the present day. I had another instance of this a little bit through the book, where maybe like halfway through the book, I realized I wanted to go back and add a big plot point. I realized that adding this plot point would make everything make sense. It was a huge edit, and so I mulled it over for a little while, and then I realized that if I weren't to do it, it would just be because it was a lot of work. So being open to that kind of fixed my plot. I'm glad I was open to that. So try to stay open to new ideas. Such a benefit of discovery writing. If a new, better idea comes along, don't be afraid to change things. So those are some tips for how to discovery write a book. Are you a discovery writer or an outliner? Or have you tried both? Or are you somewhere kind of in the middle? Let me know in the comments. Thank you so much for watching. Remember to subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss any new videos from us. We've got new writing, editing, and publishing tips every Tuesday and Friday. Until next time.